Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I would like to say thank you to all of our sponsors at this meeting today, and I'd like to thank our speakers for joining us today. You are in the Climate and Charismatic Waterbirds session, and we will have some interesting talks about some charismatic waterbirds today. Excuse me. So first, before I introduce the speakers, I would like to let folks know that we are going to have each talk in this session here. First, we're going to have two talks within the next hour and a half here, and we're going to have 30 minutes for each talk. So it's going to be, the speaker will talk for about 20 to 30 minutes, and we will have some time for questions after that. And there's going to be a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please put your questions in the Q&A. And so without further ado, I would like to please introduce Erin Giese, and she is going to be talking today about the future of birds, an overview of challenges and opportunities for facing our feathered friends.
Thank you, Jennifer, and good morning, everyone. My name is Erin Giese, and I'm happy to talk to you about birds, which is one of my main specialties. So a little bit about myself. I work at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay's Coffran Center for Biodiversity. We're a small department in which our mission is to protect and conserve biodiversity in the Western Great Lakes region through research, education, and outreach. My role is the senior research specialist, but I do a lot of work with birds, primarily in a variety of different projects. I got my bachelor's degree in Virginia, in Williamsburg at the College of William and Mary. And then my master's degree is actually what brought me to Wisconsin, where I got a master's in environmental science at UW Green Bay. And I loved Wisconsin ever since. I hope never to leave. I absolutely love the Great Lakes. So you'll see myself pictured here on the right with my husband in the bottom left and our 15-month-old son, Rainer. We certainly love to hike and travel, and did a lot of traveling before he was born, and now our lives are a little bit different, but a lot more fun. So birds, obviously they're beautiful, they're charismatic, they're colorful, they come in all different shapes and sizes. They're present on every continent on the planet. They live on land, they live on our oceans, they live on lakes, they live in so many interesting places, and people, myself included, care a lot about them, and they have their own inherent reasons to be paid attention to and considered important. So birds serve great ecosystem functions. So they serve a purpose like every plant and animal and insect in our world, and they're part of the food chain. So some birds will serve as pest control, like this tree swallow that often nests near water. This tree swallow in the bottom right with the white and blue on its head. They'll eat up to 2,000 insects in a single breeding season per day, which is tremendous if you think about how many tree swallows there are in the world. There are other birds that serve as cleanup crews, like this black vulture in the top right, who likes to eat dead things and carry on dead material. Just like bald eagles, they like to feast on roadkill, for example. And birds, like a lot of other organisms, are excellent at indicating environmental issues. So some birds and animals and plants are sensitive to pollution and disturbance, human impacts, those sorts of things. And the presence or absence of a sensitive species will tell you about the health of an ecosystem. So if a sensitive species is present, that might hint to you that you're in a good place if it's present. There's a lot of economic value in birds. I'm sure a lot of you tuned in today are active bird feeders, for example. I'll talk a little bit about bird feeding later on. And then bird watchers all over the world will travel huge distances to go birding. Maybe there's a rare bird that's shown up in an area that it doesn't normally inhabit, or maybe there's an interesting hotspot location that they want to visit during migration. And birds are also really important for hunting. A lot of hunters hunt waterfowl, as well as game birds as well. So a lot of economic value of birds. And they also can serve again, getting back to that ecosystem function where they can serve as seed dispersers, like this American robin here will eat fruit, particularly in the fall. They'll eat grapes from grapevines or dogwood berries, cherry berries, and they'll disperse those seeds throughout. And pollinators, like hummingbirds, for example, will pollinate flowers and help those plants reproduce. Unfortunately, like a lot of organisms in this world, birds are not doing well. There's a recent study that came out in 2019 by Rosenberg et al., who documented that there have basically been 2.9 billion birds disappeared since 1970. To really fathom how big of a number 2.9 billion is, I wrote out all the zeros in the bottom to really let that sink in of how many birds have gone. And I'll get into why that is, why they're declining. And that equates to 1 in 4 birds that have gone. And bird groups that are in particular peril are grassland birds that inhabit boreal habitats. And then there are a number of wetland birds that are also imperiled and having issues and declining. And here's a short list of reasons why that's the case. So there's significant habitat loss and fragmentation, wetland conversion, wetland filling. If you've ever taken a flight over our state, you'll probably get a view similar to this Google image on the right, showing you how these remaining habitats along this corridor here, maybe it's probably a stream would be my guess on the right, and everything else is cut up with agriculture, roads, people, cities, all those sorts of things. So, that's not great. Birds are also colliding with windows, particularly during migration. Birds don't process the concept of windows. And invasive species are another problem. Both plants and birds there are invasive species. So that just means a non-native but aggressive overtaking species that dominates the landscape. Outdoor cats, I have an indoor cat here, a huge cat fan, but outdoor cats are not great. They can kill many birds a year. They're one of the #1 killers of birds that end up eating them. Climate change is another real problem that's happening now and will continue to happen in the future. Climate change is affecting the timing at which birds are arriving on their breeding grounds, and their ranges are shifting northward. Vegetation is going to be changing or has changed, and it's going to really screw up the birds that we love and care about, as well as the other organisms that live in these areas. And then pesticides and pollution are certainly not good as well. If you want to learn more about climate change, Audubon's got this great Survival by Degrees report that you can look at. This slide does not pertain to birds declining, but I just want to point out that so some of my research, I spend a lot of time with working with Great Lakes coastal wetland birds. And we've looked at changes in water levels. And since today's Wisconsin's Water Week, I just wanted to throw in here a mention of lake level changes, which you're likely experiencing in your own corner of the world if you live near the Great Lakes. So lake levels fluctuate naturally due to a number of reasons, such as precipitation, precipitation from snowfall and rainfall. Water levels are also regularly changing due to seiche, which is simply wind blowing over like a Great Lake, like Lake Michigan. So wind blowing over Lake Michigan, and it pushes the water up on one side, and then it sloshes back and forth. It's kind of like a bathtub that would be outside and experiencing wind. And so these lake levels are fluctuating by an inch, along the hour, feet along the years, many feet along all the years. And we've seen huge swings within the last decade. So we reached, what this is showing is just water level changes between 2011 and 2019. And we experienced a record low water level in 2013 and repeated record highs for the past several years. 2020 is not on this graph, but it just kept going. And that's a swing of 3 to 5 feet of water, which is tremendous. And that certainly affects the plants that can survive along these coastal wetlands in coastal regions in the Great Lakes. And then, of course, which birds can survive. So we put together a paper a couple of years ago looking at how birds, how Great Lakes coastal wetland birds are affected by lake levels. And here's a list of species that prefer higher water. So both the American and least bitterns, black tern, marsh wren, American coot, pied-billed grebe, and sora. That's a type of rail. So a lot of birds like a lot of water. It's, gives them more food options and a better habitat for them for nesting. But not everybody likes high water. Sedge wrens and swamp sparrows prefer low water. And I'll just mention that, just because one of these likes high or low water doesn't mean they won't be found in the opposite conditions. It just means that more of them are documented and found in those conditions. And this is just an image on the bottom right of Duck Creek. This is Lower Green Bay that shows the difference between water in 2015 and 2019. You can see a lot of wetlands have vanished, but you can also see there's pockets of water. That's what this dark area is on the bottom right in the 2019 image. And that provides a lot more habitat, sort of a juxtaposition of the vegetation with the water creates more edge and openings. And that's why, we get a different suite of species that come in and enjoy those habitats more. Birds are an extremely diverse group on this planet. There are just over 18,000 bird species in the world and over 2,000 in North America. And all these lines that you see on this map are flyways or kind of migratory patterns that birds exhibit. Birds are always traveling north and south. Some are going northeast, southwest, and along the Great Lakes here, birds tend to follow along the Mississippi Flyway, this red line where I'm tracing. So birds will come to the Great Lakes in Wisconsin for breeding season in the summertime. And then in fall, they'll head south and migrate. Some will stop over in the winter and spend time in southeastern United States. Others will hang out in the Caribbean islands, Central America, or as far south as southern South America. And they'll spend their time down there eating food and fattening up. Probably not drinking margaritas, but they're spending enjoying some nice time and weather down in the south. And then come springtime, they'll head back north and return to Wisconsin. And of course, that's just one example, but birds certainly spend time in Canada and all over the world. The Great Lakes are a tremendous asset to birds. This is a map showing you the breeding bird species richness. So the darker this peach orange color, the higher the number of species that are supported in this area during the summertime. So you can see out of all the United States here, the 48 states, that the Great Lakes really pops out as a really important hotspot for breeding birds, as well as, of course, the Appalachian Mountains here. And this is just a small snapshot of Wisconsin birds that you can find outside your bird feeders. There's 454 species found in the state. That's not at any one time. That's birds found and reported in the state throughout the year. So some might only come in wintertime, some might only come in summer, some are all year. And then according to the Wisconsin Breeding Bird Atlas 2 project, just a few years ago, was completed, they documented 243 species breeding. So Wisconsin's clearly an important place for birds. And I just want to show you a couple of animations. So this is a scarlet tanager. It's a forest breeder, and they overwinter in Panama, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru. So what this map is showing you is how the bird travels and uses the United States based on the year. So it's going to show up in springtime. You'll see the map light up in early April. And then the birds will be lingering around the Great Lakes and the Appalachian Mountains during the breeding season. And then come fall, they'll head back south across the United States and then overwinter, like I said, in Central and South America. So that's a bird that uses Wisconsin for breeding habitat. The blackpoll uses Wisconsin for migration. So you'll see them light up in May and then disappear. They're going to be breeding in northern Canada. And then come fall, They'll again stop back through Wisconsin and the Great Lakes, and then head back to northern South America for their wintering grounds. And then other species like this rough-legged hawk only uses Wisconsin during the winter time. So they breed in the Canadian Arctic and Alaska. That's why the map right now in June is not lit up. But you'll see this species will start to light up in late fall, early winter, where they start to return here, mostly a Western species, but you can see they do use the Great Lakes for wintering habitat, and then they disappear again. So I hope I've convinced you that Wisconsin's a really important place for birds for so many reasons. And I just want to start to close my talk by describing how you yourselves can make a difference and help birds. You saw that troubling decline of bird species, the 2.9 billion birds lost since 1970. And I'm a firm believer that you're truly never too small to make a difference, whether that means you're going to be more committed to recycling or taking fewer, combining your trips and using your vehicle less often. There's lots of ways you can make a difference, no matter how big or small. Wisconsin is it consists of nearly 35 million acres of land, 35 million. Of the 35 million, 29 million acres are owned by private landowners, likely like a lot of yourselves that are tuned in today. And that's a really neat thing, because you have the opportunity to make a difference for birds, whether you live along Lake Michigan or the lakes or rivers or forested lands. You can do something to contribute to help birds. So here's a short list of ways that you can manage your property for birds. You can landscape with native plants and remove invasive species. That's what we did when we became landowners here in Appleton. A couple of years ago, we dug out all the invasive plants in our yard and replaced them with natives. You can also minimize the amount of work that you do on your lawn by minimizing the chemicals that you put on it, and then also not raking all of your leaves. We live in town, so we certainly do have to comply with the rest of the neighbors and rake, but we tend to leave a little bit here and there across the grass, and we leave them all in our landscape beds, and that provides food and cover for things that birds are going to be digging through. If you happen to own a large tract of land, it's always best to maintain them in large pieces and try not to fragment them and cut them up. And if you live in a forested area, you have the ability to leave snags or hollowed out trees, a brush pile, woody debris. All of that stuff is great for birds. They can nest in there, they can dig for food in there. There's a really nice structure, and you're going to attract more species that way. If you live along the lake shore, it's always best to leave naturalized shoreline and try not to harden it with riprap and other hardened surfaces. So you'll get more birds that way if you leave it natural. And then, of course, keeping cat indoors is always a good thing. I mentioned that at the beginning. If you want to attract birds to your property, there's lots and lots of ways you can do that. You can put out bird seed or suet. Maybe you want to put up a nest box on your property and attract a specific bird. You can also hang nesting material that birds can take from. That's what's shown here in the bottom left. Or maybe you want to provide water. Water is a great way to bring birds to your property. They will drink the water or bathe in it. I would just urge caution in making sure that you keep it clean, keeping that bath clean every couple of days to make sure that no bacteria have a chance to grow in there. And lastly, I think this is my last slide here, is to become a more engaged bird watcher or wildlife viewer. There are dozens of local birding clubs throughout the state that you'd be more than welcome to join and participate in, go birding, meet friends, and volunteer your time to help that effort. If you don't have the time or interest in that, there's lots of ways you can donate money to bird conservation efforts to help the greater picture and how to protect birds. Maybe you want to go out actively birding and collect data. So there's community science efforts throughout the year that you can participate in. The winter ones that just came through are the Christmas bird count and Great Backyard Bird Count. And then you can also submit bird checklists to eBird, which is a really large database that allows you to submit data to, and scientists use these big data sets to look at climate change effects on birds, migration patterns, abundances, trends, all those sorts of things. And every checklist that you submit can help contribute to that. So I'll be opening up for questions, but I just want to kick it off and let you know that there's a lot of other exciting bird talks coming this week, including right after me, talk on bald eagles and osprey. Osprey is pictured here. And some other water birds like sandhill cranes, waterfowl, pelicans, trumpeter swans, you name it. It's going to be a great week, and I hope I've inspired you to tune into these bird talks and get excited and learn all about birds. So thank you for your time, and I will take questions at this time.
Okay, thank you very much, Erin. We have 10 minutes now for questions. And so if you have any questions for Erin, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A box and I will read them off and Erin will answer them. So far we have one question where someone is asking, what can we do to help grassland birds?
That's a great question. So it depends, I guess, on where you live. If the person lives in an area, maybe you. So I guess I'll address this in terms of if you're a farmer or live in an agricultural landscape. Grassland birds are one of the hardest hit birds in terms of population loss, and what they really need is habitat in the breeding season. And if you are a person that owns property in an agricultural landscape, grassland birds do find habitat in the ditches between the road and your property. So it's best to just leave all that area in those ditches unmowed for the entire summer season, because lots of birds find ways to nest in there. There are also programs that you can enroll in, and there are ways that you can manage your crops to promote grassland bird habitat. You can do things like wait to, you can leave certain fields fallow and allow certain fields to be left untouched and others used for crops. Or you can, what am I trying to say here? Also wait, so some birds will use your crops, like hay fields, for example, I believe it's hay fields, birds do nest in, I believe they nest in those sorts of crops. And sometimes if you just wait after a certain point in the summertime to retain the crop, it'll allow the birds a chance to nest and allow their birds to fledge. So that answer, I hope, helps a little bit, but it's really targeted at people that live in the agricultural landscape.
Okay, thank you. And then we also have another question. Someone's asking, we have pileated woodpeckers far more this year at our feeders. What might be the reason? We rarely got them in the past. And I would say that this is true for myself in central Wisconsin as well, seeing a lot more pileateds this year.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know a lot of people get curious as to why certain birds show up in their yards and not previously. And I don't have a great answer for that. I mean, it could be something that you're doing specifically on your property that's attracting them to it. Maybe they like bigger woods and bigger trees and hollowed out trees like those snags I mentioned, and dead standing wood so they can dig around for food in there. So that's could be a reason, or maybe you're providing a food source that they like. But birds have wings, they travel a lot of different places, and maybe you just got lucky. But I've not heard of any like upward trend of pileated woodpeckers or anything like that. I can't really comment more than that, but consider yourself lucky because they're really cool.
Excellent. And so another question, are there any studies that discuss impact of mosquito spraying services, or the impact that mosquito spraying services are having on bird populations? Obviously birds eat mosquitoes, but are there any other concerns?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I know there are people studying the impacts of pesticide application on insects and then on birds. And I have heard that there is a link to that where the more pesticide application that you have has an impact on the birds that eat them. And sometimes those chemicals can travel up the food chain and affect the birds that are eating those bugs. So minimizing pesticides is best for sure.
Okay, would there be a reason that several of my friends and I have had various woodpeckers that are suet, but then were gone for a month and are now back?
Could you repeat that question?
Sure. It's asking, would there be a reason that several of my friends and I have had various woodpeckers that are suet feeders, but then the woodpeckers were gone for a month and now are back?
I guess it depends on the time of year. It's possible I mean, in the breeding season, if they disappeared, it could be that they're busy sitting on eggs and incubating or taking care of young, and they're feeding their young bugs instead. So their diet might change as opposed to eating suet. But if it's in the wintertime, it could just be that they've found another food source. It's hard to know. I would need to know more information about the time of year that happened.
Okay, we have about 4 minutes left. There's no other questions at the moment. But so feel free if anyone else has any additional questions. We do have a little bit of time left, so feel free to pop one in the Q&A.
And in the meantime, while we're waiting for questions, I can just mention a few resources that people could visit if they're interested in learning more about birds. I would suggest the website called allaboutbirds.org, allaboutbirds.org. It's a website run through the Cornell University. They're kind of like the bird hub of North America. And there's lots of ways that you can, so they have a free online database. If you want to look up more information about pileated woodpecker, for example, you can type in that bird's name and a species account will show up. You'll see their range map, life history, what they like to eat, where they like to nest. And if you want to know what their voice sounds like, they have sound bites that you can click on, and then lots and lots of photos. So that's a great resource. The National Audubon Society also has everything you can imagine about birds as well. And you can certainly join and become a member of National Audubon. But they also have that climate change report that I mentioned earlier, where you can learn about how bird species ranges will be changing over the next couple of decades. Any other questions, Jennifer?
Yep, a couple more. So
Okay.
but this one looks like it's more of a comment, but it says lower water levels in wetlands in lakes can create habitat that birds like black terns can thrive in. We had hundreds on Beaver Dam Lake after a drawdown, so high water is not always beneficial.
Right. So that sounds like a place that has, that sounds like an inland place. Is that right, Jennifer?
I can't see who's asking the questions.
Okay. Well, the study that I reported on was for Great Lakes coastal wetlands. So I can't comment on inland. But what I will say is that just because a bird prefers a certain lake level doesn't mean it won't be found in the opposite lake level. For example, sedge wrens prefer lower lake levels in Great Lakes coastal wetlands, but in high water, it doesn't mean you can't find one there. It just means there will be fewer of them. And I would say that's probably the same thing to be said about black terns. And especially if they are, black terns have high site fidelity, so they're going to return to a place that they know has worked for them in the past for breeding. So it could be the fact that they're just drawn to that location.
Okay, so
Good question. Mm-hmm.
One more minute here. So just going to say that there was a follow-up on the woodpecker. There's a question. They say that they're in Marshfield, and a friend in Ashland said that they had the same thing where woodpeckers disappeared for about a month and it was in the dead of winter. So it just was interesting that it seemed to happen all at the same time.
Well, that's definitely interesting. It could just be that they found another food source.
Okay.
But anyway, it's 8:45, so I will sign off and thank you for having me and hope everyone has a great rest of their week.
Yep. And